She's not responding. Vitals are crashing. No pulse. Starting CPR. Get the crash cart. It's in now. Come on, breathe.
41 hours. 15 doctors. $12 million in medical technology. Zero hope. Catherine Harding's body was shutting down in a way no one could explain. Her baby's heartbeat was fading. The surgical team was preparing for a procedure with a 5% survival rate. A last-ditch effort that would likely kill them both. And outside the glass wall, a janitor named Grace was watching the entire medical establishment miss the most obvious clue. They were looking at screens. Grace was looking at the patient. They saw data. Grace saw the hidden fire, a condition her grandmother had taught her to recognize 50 years ago in a village without electricity, without hospitals, without any of the tools these doctors depended on. Grace knew what would happen if she stayed silent. 2 deaths. Maybe 3, if you counted the part of her soul that would die from choosing safety over truth. So she did the unthinkable. She dropped her mop, walked to that door and knocked. "You're looking at the wrong screen." 5 words. Few seconds to prove herself. Everything on the line. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What Grace did in the next 2 minutes didn't just challenge medical protocol. It shattered every assumption about who gets to be an expert, who deserves to be heard, and what happens when ancestral knowledge meets institutional arrogance. 41 hours earlier, Grace was just the janitor. Invisible, ignored, holding a mop instead of delivering babies. But she was watching. She'd been observing through the glass walls of the Harding Pavilion for nearly 2 days now. Not because she was curious, but because something in her bones told her to pay attention. She'd watched the doctors cycling through their cooling protocols, heard the increasingly desperate consultations, seen Catherine's screams turning from powerful to silent, from fighting to surrendering. And Grace knew, with the certainty that came from delivering 47 babies in her grandmother's village before she was 25 years old, exactly what was wrong. Catherine wasn't in a coma. She was in a false paralysis induced by the very technology meant to save her. The $12 million cooling blankets were masking a condition Grace's grandmother called the hidden fire, when the body appears frozen but is actually burning from within. The machines were lying. And Grace could see it in the flickering of Catherine's left eyelid. A tiny muscle movement the monitors completely missed. Grace looked at the glass partition, then at the security guard making his rounds, then at her reflection in the polished hospital floor. She thought about what would happen if she was wrong. She'd lose her job definitely. Probably get deported. Might even face criminal charges for practicing medicine without a license. Then she thought about what would happen if she was right and did nothing. A mother would die. Baby would die. And Grace would carry that weight for whatever years she had left. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When you have the sight, child, staying silent is the same as doing harm." Grace set down her mop, smoothed her faded work uniform, and walked toward the door of the Harding Pavilion. What would you risk to save 2 lives when the world says you're nobody qualified to try? Grace had learned to be invisible long before she crossed the ocean from the Caribbean. It was a survival skill she'd developed as an immigrant woman in a country that valued credentials over knowledge, titles over truth. When you grow up in a place where hospitals are hours away and birth complications mean death, you learn that being seen for what you truly are, a healer, can be dangerous if you don't have the right pieces of paper. She'd come to New York 12 years ago with nothing but $300 in her pocket and a cousin's promise of work. That cousin had exaggerated. The work turned out to be night shift custodial services at a hospital where Grace's knowledge meant nothing and her experience counted for less than 0. The job had been necessary. It was legal work with a paycheck she could send home to her own children, still living in the islands, waiting for their mother to save enough money to bring them over. Grace had been grateful, so grateful that she'd never complained about the floors she mopped, the waste she disposed of, the way doctors and nurses looked through her like she was made of furniture. But Grace carried something those doctors didn't have. She carried the sight, the gift of 7 generations of Caribbean healers. Women who'd brought babies into the world with nothing but their hands and their wisdom and their absolute refusal to let mothers die when there was something they could do about it. Her grandmother, Mama Aya, had been the island's primary birth attendant for 50 years. She'd delivered over 800 babies, lost only 5, and those losses haunted her until the day she died. Mama Aya had started teaching Grace when she was just 9 years old. Not because Grace had asked, but because her grandmother had looked at her one morning and announced, "You have the sight, child. Can see it. The knowing is in your hands." Grace hadn't understood what that meant until her first birth at age 13, when her neighbor went into labor during a hurricane and there was no way to reach the clinic on the mainland. Mama Aya had brought Grace with her, positioned her small hands on the laboring woman's belly, and taught her to feel things that couldn't be seen on any screen. The position of the baby, the rhythm of contractions, the moment when intervention was needed, and the moment when the only thing required was patience and prayer. By the time Grace was 20, she was attending births on her own. By 22, she had a reputation. Women would travel across the island just so Grace could be the one to catch their babies. She'd delivered twins during a blackout with nothing but candlelight. She'd turned a breech baby using techniques Mama Aya had learned from her grandmother, gentle manipulations that convinced the child to flip without surgery. She'd saved a hemorrhaging mother using pressure points and herbal poultices that American doctors would dismiss as folklore. And then the economy had collapsed in her village. The clinic had closed. Grace's husband had died in a fishing accident, leaving her with 3 children and no income. Her sister had already made it to New York and promised Grace there was work, there was hope, there was a future. So Grace had made the hardest choice of her life. She'd left behind everything she knew, everyone she loved, and the sacred calling that had defined her existence, to come to a country where her knowledge meant nothing and her hands were only valued for holding a mop. For 12 years, she'd been a custodian. For 12 years, she'd cleaned the very delivery rooms where doctors who knew a fraction of what she understood about birth walked past her without acknowledgement. She'd made peace with it, or told herself she had. This was the price of survival, of sending money home, of eventually bringing her children to safety. But tonight, standing outside the Harding Pavilion, watching Catherine's body shut down while 15 specialists argued over data and ignored what was right in front of them, Grace felt something crack open inside her chest. The part of her that had been a healer, a midwife, a woman who understood birth the way a musician understands rhythm, that part refused to stay silent anymore. The Harding Pavilion wasn't just a hospital wing. It was a monument to Kenneth Harding's wealth. His family's foundation had donated $50 million to build this gleaming fortress of glass and steel, complete with private suites that looked more like penthouse apartments than medical rooms. Grace had mopped every inch of these floors for the past 12 years, polished the marble plaques bearing the Harding name, emptied the trash bins in rooms where Kenneth's business associates recovered from their minor procedures in luxury. Not once had Kenneth Harding looked her in the eye. Not once had Catherine acknowledged her presence with more than a distracted nod. To them, Grace was part of the building itself. Functional, forgettable, beneath notice. But invisibility had its advantages. When you're furniture, people forget you have ears. They forget you have eyes. They forget you have a mind that's cataloging every word, every gesture, every mistake. Through the glass wall, Grace watched the 15 specialists arrange themselves around Catherine's bed like priests at an altar. She recognized some of them from the hospital newsletters that got thrown away. Dr. Marcus Sterling from Harvard, the neurologist who'd written 3 textbooks. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Mayo Clinic, renowned for high-risk obstetrics. Dr. Richard Pemberton from Johns Hopkins, whose experimental protocols had been featured in medical journals Grace found in the recycling bins. They spoke in the language of certainty, their voices carrying through the supposedly soundproof glass. Neurological stasis is progressing. The EEG shows minimal brain activity. We need to maintain the cold blanket protocol until we can safely extract. Grace's hands tightened on her mop handle. The cold blanket protocol. She'd heard them say it at least 20 times in the past 6 hours. Therapeutic hypothermia, they called it, cooling the body to protect the brain from damage during trauma. The machines were set to keep Catherine at precisely 89.6 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to slow cellular death, warm enough to theoretically maintain life. Except Catherine wasn't dying from brain trauma. She was dying from being frozen alive. Grace had seen this before back home, during the dengue fever outbreak when her cousin Maria had nearly died. The foreign doctors who'd come to help had tried to cool her burning body with ice baths, following their protocols, their data, their Western medical training. Maria had stopped responding, her body locked in what looked like a coma. Mama Aya had dragged the doctors out of the room and done what seemed impossible. She'd wrapped Maria in warm blankets and made her sweat. The fever isn't the enemy, she'd explained to a young Grace. The body knows how to fight. But when you freeze the fight, you freeze the soul. Maria had woken up 3 hours later. Now, watching the monitors above Catherine's bed display their confident lies, Grace saw the same signs. The slight discoloration behind Catherine's left ear, a reddish-purple shadow that indicated blood pooling where it shouldn't. The almost imperceptible tremor in her right hand's fingers. Not a spasm, but a desperate signal from a body trying to break free of its chemical prison. The way her left eyelid flickered every 47 seconds, Grace had counted, like Morse code from someone buried alive. Catherine's body was screaming. The machines were translating those screams into flatlines and calling it brain death. Dr. Sterling's voice cut through Grace's observations. We've given her 41 hours. The data is conclusive. We need to prep for emergency extraction before we lose them both. Emergency extraction. A clinical term for cutting the baby out of a mother who might not survive the surgery. Grace looked down at her reflection in the polished floor. A 60-year-old woman in a faded uniform, holding a mop, standing on the wrong side of the glass. Then she looked up at Catherine's flickering eyelid. The knowledge is in your hands, child. Grace set down her mop and walked toward the door. Grace's hand hesitated on the door handle, and suddenly she wasn't in Manhattan Memorial anymore. She was 9 years old again, standing in Mama Aya's kitchen while Hurricane George tore the roof off half the island. The memory came sharp and clear. Rosa Mercado screaming in the back room, her baby stuck for 6 hours, the clinic on the mainland unreachable because the bridge had washed out. The regular doctor, a man from San Juan who came twice a month, was trapped on the other side of the flooded river. Mama Aya had turned to young Grace with rain pouring through the broken ceiling and said, "Come. Today you learn why we exist." Grace had followed her grandmother into that room expecting to see Rosa die. Instead, she watched Mama Aya do something the doctors said was impossible. She'd placed her hands on Rosa's belly, not pressing, not manipulating, just listening with her palms. Her eyes had closed. Her breathing had slowed. And then she'd begun to hum. Not a song exactly. More like a vibration that Grace could feel in her own chest. "The baby is confused," Mama Aya had whispered. "She hears her mother's fear and thinks the world is not safe. We must tell her differently." For 20 minutes, Mama Aya had hummed and pressed specific points on Rosa's body. Her neck, her ankles, behind her ears. Places that had nothing to do with the womb, or so Grace had thought. Later, Mama Aya explained, "The body is a river, child. When one part dams up, you don't push harder at the dam. You open channels upstream." Rosa's baby had been born 30 minutes later, healthy and crying, while the hurricane raged outside. "This is the sight," Mama Aya had told Grace afterward, holding her small hands. "Not with eyes but with knowing. The body speaks a language older than words. Doctors read their machines. We read the truth." For the next 13 years, Grace had learned that language. She'd learned that a mother's left earlobe turning pale meant the baby was pressing on a major vein. That a specific rhythm of breathing indicated the cervix was opening, even when it appeared closed. That sometimes the gentlest touch in the right place could unlock what force and surgery never could. She'd become known as the shadow doctor, practicing a medicine that had no degree, no license, no recognition from any institution, but had a perfect track record that spoke for itself. And then she'd come to America, where that track record meant nothing. Grace remembered her first week at Manhattan Memorial, watching a delivery go wrong, knowing exactly what to do, and being told by a nurse to just empty the trash and leave the medical work to professionals. She'd bitten her tongue so hard it bled. She remembered the day she tried to suggest, gently, respectfully, that a laboring woman needed to change positions, and the attending physician had reported her to management for overstepping. She'd nearly been fired. She'd learned quickly. In this country, credentials mattered more than knowledge. A piece of paper from a university mattered more than 47 successful births. Being seen mattered more than being right. So Grace had made herself smaller, quieter, invisible. She'd traded her healing hands for a mop because her children needed to eat. She'd swallowed her gift because survival required silence. For 12 years, she'd watched women suffer through complications she could have prevented, babies struggle through deliveries she could have eased, all while holding a bucket and staying out of the way. But Mama Aya's voice had never left her. When you have the sight, child, staying silent is the same as doing harm. Grace's hand tightened on the door handle. Mama Aya had delivered babies during hurricanes, during floods, during the darkest days when hospitals were segregated and women like Rosa had nowhere else to turn. She'd never had permission. She'd never waited for approval. She just saved lives. Grace pushed open the door to the Harding Pavilion. The room fell silent the moment Grace stepped inside. 15 pairs of eyes turned toward her, some confused, some annoyed, all of them seeing her the same way they always had. As an interruption, an intrusion, a janitor who'd forgotten her place. Dr. Marcus Sterling was the first to speak. His voice sharp with irritation. "Excuse me, we're in the middle of a critical procedure prep. You'll need to clean this room later." Grace didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on Catherine's still form, on the monitors displaying their precise lies, on the cooling blankets wrapped around her like a burial shroud. "Dr. Sterling," one of the younger residents said, gesturing to the tablet in his hand, "the latest scan confirms complete neurological stasis. Brain activity is minimal and declining. We're at 41 hours post-onset." Sterling nodded grimly. "Then we're out of time. Prep the ore for emergency extraction." Emergency extraction. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Another doctor, Dr. Tanaka, spoke up, her voice heavy with regret. "The procedure carries a 5% survival rate for the mother, given her current state. The baby's chances are better, perhaps 60%, but 5%, Kenneth Harding repeated from the corner of the room, his voice hollow. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 2 days. "You're telling me my wife has a 5% chance of surviving surgery to save our child?" "Mr. Harding," Sterling said gently, "we've exhausted every other option. The cold blanket protocol was our best chance to preserve brain function while we searched for the underlying cause, but her body isn't responding. At this point, extraction is the only way to save your son." Grace's jaw clenched. She watched as they prepared to make the worst decision possible based on the wrongest diagnosis imaginable. She'd seen the truth hours ago, but now it was undeniable. The discoloration behind Catherine's left ear had deepened to a dark purple, not the pale blue of hypothermia, but the angry color of blood pooling where it shouldn't. Her right hand's fingers weren't limp. They were tremoring with a rhythm Grace recognized. And that eyelid, still flickering every 47 seconds, was sending a message these machines were too blind to read. Catherine wasn't dying from neurological stasis. She was dying from being frozen alive while her body fought a battle the doctors couldn't see. The cooling blankets were inducing a false coma, shutting down her responses while her core temperature screamed for release. Mama Aya had a name for this: the ice trap, when external cooling triggers an internal fire, and the body locks down to protect itself, appearing dead while actually burning with effort. The solution wasn't surgery. It was warmth, movement, release. But Grace was holding a mop, not a medical degree. She watched Dr. Sterling pull up Catherine's chart on his tablet, watched the other specialists nod in agreement with his assessment, watched Kenneth Harding sign the consent form with shaking hands. They were going to cut into Catherine in 15 minutes. They were going to extract a baby from a mother who wasn't dying, who was fighting, who just needed someone to see her. Grace's mop slipped from her fingers. It hit the polished floor with a clatter that echoed through the sterile room like a gunshot. Every head turned, and Grace heard herself say the 5 words that would either save 2 lives or destroy her own. "You're looking at the wrong screen." The silence that followed was absolute. 14 doctors stared at Grace with expressions ranging from confusion to outrage. Kenneth Harding's grief-stricken face slowly transformed into something harder, darker. "What did you just say?" His voice was ice. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice came out steady. "You're looking at the wrong screen. All of you. You're reading the machines, but you're not reading her." Dr. Sterling stepped forward, his face flushing red. "Security! Get this woman out of here immediately." "Wait!" Grace raised her hand, her eyes never leaving Catherine's still form. "Look at her left ear. Behind it. Do you see that discoloration?" "This is completely inappropriate," Dr. Tanaka interjected. "Mr. Harding, I apologize for this. Do you see it?" Grace's voice rose, urgent now. "It's not blue. It's purple. Dark purple. That's not hypothermia. That's blood pooling because her body is fighting against your cooling protocol." Kenneth Harding moved toward her, his jaw clenched. "How dare you speak in here? Do you have any idea what?" "Her left eyelid," Grace continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "It's been flickering every 47 seconds for the past 6 hours. Not randomly. Every 47 seconds. That's not brain death. That's communication. That's involuntary muscle spasms," Sterling snapped. "Common in patients under therapeutic hypothermia. This woman has no medical training, no authority to." "Her right hand," Grace interrupted, pointing. "Watch her fingers. They're not limp. They're tremoring. Feel her pulse at her wrist and you'll find it's stronger than your machines say it is." One of the younger residents actually moved closer to Catherine's bed, curiosity overriding protocol. "Don't you dare touch that patient," Sterling commanded. Then to Grace. "You're a custodian. You mop floors. You have no business diagnosing." "I've delivered 47 babies," Grace said quietly, and the room went still again. 47. Before I ever held this mop. I've seen bodies do things your machines can't measure. I've watched women come back from places your scans say are impossible." Kenneth's face was a mask of grief and fury. "My wife is dying. Our son is dying. And you think you know better than 15 specialists from the best medical schools in the world." "I think," Grace said carefully, "that your wife isn't in a coma. She's in a false paralysis induced by the very technology you're using to save her. You're freezing her body while it's trying to burn through labor. You're reading her silence as death when it's actually survival." "This is insane," Sterling said. "Mr. Harding, I'm calling security right now. This woman is practicing medicine without a license, and she's interfering with." Grace took a step closer to Catherine's bed. "She has what my grandmother called the hidden fire. It looks like a neurological shutdown because the body freezes its exterior to protect its core. But inside she's burning up. Fighting. trying to break through. And your cooling blankets are her prison. Get her out of here, Kenneth said, his voice breaking. Get her out before I. And then Catherine's right hand spasmed. Not a small tremor. A full, violent spasm that jerked her entire arm upward before falling back to the bed. Exactly as Grace had predicted. The monitors erupted in alarmed beeping. Dr. Tanaka rushed to check the readings, her eyes widening. That's impossible, she whispered. Her neural response just spiked. Grace locked eyes with Kenneth Harding. I can save them both. But you have to give me a chance. The room erupted into chaos. Absolutely not. Dr. Sterling's face had gone from red to purple. Mr. Harding, this woman has no credentials, no license, no legal right to touch your wife. If you allow this, you're opening yourself to. Her hand moved, Kenneth interrupted, staring at Catherine's arm. Exactly when she said it would. A coincidence, Sterling shot back. Muscle spasms are unpredictable by nature. This woman is exploiting your desperation with. With what? Grace asked quietly. What am I exploiting? I have nothing to gain. I'll lose my job for speaking up. I might lose my freedom. But your wife will lose her life if you don't listen. One of the younger doctors, a resident named Dr. Chan that Grace had seen in the hallways, spoke up hesitantly. Dr. Sterling, the discoloration she mentioned. I do see it. And it's not consistent with hypothermia presentations. Chan, that's enough, Sterling snapped. Kenneth Harding stood frozen between his dying wife and 15 experts telling him to trust their data, while a janitor with worn hands told him to trust his eyes. Mr. Harding, Dr. Tanaka said gently, I understand you're desperate. We all are. But allowing an unlicensed individual to perform any kind of intervention could be considered criminal negligence. If something goes wrong. Something is already wrong, Grace said. 41 hours wrong. 15 specialists are wrong. $12 million of equipment wrong. This is medical malpractice waiting to happen, Sterling declared. I'm calling security. I'm calling the medical board. I'm scared, Grace finished for him. You're scared that I might be right. That all your training, all your technology, all your certainty might have missed something a woman with a mop could see. Sterling's face went rigid. How dare you? 2 minutes, Kenneth Harding said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at him. What? Sterling breathed. Kenneth's eyes were locked on Catherine's flickering eyelid. Grace had seen him counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3. 47. Watching his wife's silent signal that no machine had flagged. Give her 2 minutes, Kenneth repeated, his voice stronger now. If my wife is really dying the way you say she is, Dr. Sterling, then 2 minutes won't make a difference. But if this woman is right. He looked at Grace fully for the first time in 12 years. If she's right, then you've been killing my wife while trying to save her. This is madness, Sterling protested. I won't be party to. It's not your decision, Kenneth said coldly. It's mine. And I'm giving her 2 minutes. The room went dead silent. Dr. Sterling stepped back. His tablet clutched to his chest like a shield. Fine. But when this fails, and it will fail, I want it on record that I strongly advised against this course of action. Noted, Kenneth said. Then to Grace. 2 minutes. Starting now. Grace moved to Catherine's bedside. Her hands already knowing what to do even as her mind raced with the weight of what she'd just accepted. 15 pairs of eyes watched her. 15 experts are waiting for her to fail. Grace blocked them all out and placed her weathered, cleaning chemical-worn hands on Catherine Harding's neck. I'm here, she whispered. Let's bring you home. Grace's fingers found the pulse point on Catherine's neck, not to check her heartbeat, but to listen to what the body was saying beneath the skin. She closed her eyes, blocking out the machines, the watching doctors, The ticking clock that counted down her 2 minutes. She felt it. The same locked rhythm she'd felt in Maria during the dengue outbreak. The body wasn't shutting down. It was holding on, fighting against the cold that was supposed to save it. "What is she doing?" Dr. Sterling muttered. "This is absurd." Grace ignored him. She began to hum, low and steady, the same sound Mama Aya had used that night during Hurricane George. Not a melody, but a vibration that resonated through her palms into Catherine's frozen skin. "This is witch doctor nonsense," another specialist scoffed. But Grace felt Catherine's pulse shift slightly, responding to the rhythm. She moved her hands to specific pressure points on Catherine's neck, not the carotid arteries the doctors would recognize, but the smaller nerve clusters Mama Aya had mapped through generations of observation. Press, release, press, release. Each touch released tiny pathways that had been locked shut by the cold. "Her vitals aren't changing," Dr. Tanaka reported, watching the monitors. No response. Grace moved to Catherine's feet, pulling back the cooling blanket. Her hands found the pressure points on the ankles, the places where Mama Aya said, "The body remembers how to dance." The humming continued, steady and low. Grace pressed her thumbs into the hollows behind Catherine's ankle bones, feeling for the locked tension. She pressed harder, holding the pressure while maintaining the rhythmic hum. 60 seconds, Kenneth said, his voice tight with hope and fear. The monitors flatlined further. Catherine's body remained still as death. Several doctors shook their heads. One actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I told you." But Grace wasn't done. She leaned close to Catherine's ear, her hands still working the pressure points on her feet, and began to whisper. Not medical instructions. Not clinical observations. The same song Mama Aya had sung to Rosa Mercado during the hurricane. The same song Grace had sung to 47 mothers in her village. A song about coming home, about being safe, about a world waiting to welcome new life. Ven a casa pequeña. El mundo te espera. Ven a casa. This is insane, Sterling breathed. Singing to a comatose patient while we waste precious. Catherine's left eye opened. Not a flicker. Not a spasm. Fully open, pupil dilating in the light. "Oh my God," Dr. Chin whispered. Grace kept singing, kept pressing the points on Catherine's feet, kept the rhythmic vibration flowing through her hands. Catherine's right eye snapped open. Her mouth opened in a gasp, not the shallow breathing of a dying woman, but a deep, desperate pull of air. "Her oxygen saturation is spiking," Dr. Tanaka said, staring at the monitors in disbelief. 92%. 95. 98. Catherine's back arched suddenly. Her hands gripped the bed rails. And she screamed, not in pain but in effort. The frozen labor that had been locked for 41 hours broke free in an instant. "She's crowning," Dr. Chen shouted. "The baby is crowning." The room exploded into motion. Doctors who'd been sneering moments ago now rushed to prepare for delivery. But Grace stayed exactly where she was, hands on Catherine's feet, humming the song of homecoming, guiding the body back to its ancient purpose. Ven a casa pequeña. 4 minutes later, the Harding Pavilion filled with the loudest, healthiest cry of a newborn baby boy. Catherine held her son against her chest, sobbing with relief and joy and the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting your way back from the edge of death. Her eyes were clear. Her skin was warm. The monitors that had declared her dying now showed strong, steady vitals. The 15 specialists stood in the corner of the room, their tablets and data useless in their hands. Dr. Sterling's face was pale. Dr. Tanaka stared at Grace as if seeing a ghost. The younger resident, Dr. Chen, had tears streaming down his face. I don't understand," Sterling stammered. The neurological stasis was conclusive. The scans showed what you expected to see, Grace said quietly. She was picking up her mop from where it had fallen, preparing to finish her shift. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. You trusted the machines more than the patient. Kenneth Harding hadn't moved from his wife's bedside, his hand gripping hers as if he'd never let go. But his eyes tracked Grace as she gathered her cleaning supplies. Wait, he said. Grace paused. Kenneth carefully released his wife's hand and crossed the room. For a moment, he just stared at Grace, this woman who'd mopped his family's floors for 12 years, who he'd never truly seen until tonight. Then Kenneth Harding, billionaire CEO, heir to a shipping empire, dropped to his knees before Grace. You saved them, he whispered. You saved my whole world. Grace shifted uncomfortably. I just did what needed doing. Anyone with the sight could have. No, Kenneth interrupted. Not anyone. You risked everything to speak up when no one else saw the truth. You trusted your knowledge when the entire medical establishment told you that you were wrong. He looked up at her, his eyes red. How do I thank you for that? How do I possibly? You can start, Grace said gently, by looking people in the eye, even the ones holding mops, especially the ones holding mops. We see more than you think. Behind them, Catherine laughed, a weak but genuine sound. She's right, Kenneth. How many times did I walk past her and never once wonder who she really was? Grace smiled. You were busy, Mrs. Harding. Rich people usually are. Grace, Catherine said, and it was the first time she'd ever said Grace's name. Come here. Please. Grace set down her mop and approached the bed. Catherine reached out and took her hand, the same chemical-worn hand that had just saved her life. You have a gift, Catherine said. A real gift. And you've been wasting it mopping floors because we were too blind to see it. I don't have the credentials, Grace said. No degree, no license. Then we'll get you credentials, Kenneth said, rising to his feet. We'll fund your education, I'm 60 years old, Grace laughed. By the time I finish medical school, I'll be ready to retire. Then we'll find another way, Kenneth said firmly. He turned to face the 15 specialists who'd been wrong. Dr. Sterling, you and the board will meet with me tomorrow morning. We're going to discuss some significant changes to how this hospital evaluates expertise. Sterling's jaw worked soundlessly. In the meantime, Kenneth continued, looking back at Grace, you're done mopping floors. Whatever you need, salary, position, respect, you name it. Grace looked at her mop, then at the tiny baby sleeping in Catherine's arms, then at her own worn hands that still carried 7 generations of knowledge in their fingertips. Chief of Observational Medicine, she said quietly. Kenneth blinked. What? That's what I want. A position where I can teach doctors to actually look at their patients, to see what the machines miss, to remember that bodies speak a language older than technology. Grace met his eyes. Can you give me that? Kenneth Harding smiled for the first time in 41 hours. Consider it done. 1 year later, Grace stood in front of a classroom of medical residents, wearing a white coat over her scrub-colored heart. The coat felt strange even now, lighter than she'd expected, heavier than she'd imagined. Who can tell me, she asked the 20 eager faces watching her, what this patient's left earlobe is saying? On the screen behind her, a photograph showed a woman in early labor. The residents squinted at the image, searching for the vital signs they'd been trained to recognize. Her blood pressure is elevated, one resident offered. You can see it in the facial flushing. Good, Grace nodded. What else? Increased perspiration indicates stress response, another added. True. But look closer. Not at the obvious signs. At the small things. A young resident in the back, a woman who reminded Grace of herself at that age, raised her hand hesitantly. Her left earlobe is pale. Paler than the right. Almost bloodless. Grace smiled. Yes. And what does that tell you? That blood flow is compromised on the left side. Why? The residents looked at each other, uncertain. These were brilliant students from top medical schools, trained in the latest technology and techniques. But Grace was teaching them something their expensive educations had missed: how to see. The baby is positioned against the mother's descending aorta, Grace explained. The left earlobe is the body's earliest warning system because it's the furthest point from the heart with the thinnest tissue. When blood flow is compromised by the baby's position, the left ear shows it first, long before the monitors pick up distress. She watched understanding dawn in their eyes. This is what I call the sight, Grace continued. It's not magic. It's observation. It's knowing that the body speaks volumes if we're willing to listen. Your machines are wonderful tools. But they're not replacements for your eyes, your hands, your attention. The door to the classroom opened. Grace looked up to see Catherine Harding entering, holding the hand of a healthy 1-year-old boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's bright eyes. The class fell silent, recognizing the woman whose story had become legendary at Manhattan Memorial. The billionaire's wife who'd been saved by a janitor when 15 specialists had failed. "Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Grace," Catherine said with a warm smile. But someone wanted to visit his favorite teacher. Little James Harding toddled toward Grace with the confident stumble of a child who'd never known he almost didn't exist. Grace scooped him up, her heart full. "He's beautiful," she said to Catherine. "Strong and healthy." "Because of you," Catherine replied. She addressed the residents. "I hope you're all paying attention to Dr. Grace. She sees things your technology can't measure. She knows things your textbooks don't teach. And she saved my life by trusting knowledge that this hospital almost ignored." Kenneth Harding appeared in the doorway behind his wife. "The board meeting is in 20 minutes, Grace. They're ready to approve the expansion." The Grace Foundation had started small, just Grace and 3 residents learning the sight in a borrowed classroom. But word had spread fast. Doctors who'd been humbled by Grace's success wanted to learn. Patients who'd been misdiagnosed by machines wanted practitioners who could truly see them. Medical schools were requesting Grace's curriculum. Now the foundation was expanding into a full research and training center. Kenneth had donated another $50 million to build it. Dr. Chen, the young resident who'd been brave enough to question Dr. Sterling that night, was going to lead the clinical research division. Even Dr. Tanaka had asked to study under Grace, admitting that 40 years of practice hadn't taught her what Grace knew in her bones. Dr. Sterling had resigned. Some said he was pushed. Grace didn't ask. "I'll be there," Grace told Kenneth. Then to her students, "Class dismissed. But I want you all to spend the next week observing patients without looking at their charts first. Watch them. Notice the small things. Write down what their bodies tell you before the machines speak." As the residents filed out, several stopped to thank her, to ask questions, to express wonder at this new way of seeing they were learning. When the room was finally empty except for Catherine, Kenneth, and baby James, Grace set the boy down and watched him explore the classroom with fearless curiosity. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd stayed silent?" Catherine asked quietly. Grace considered the question. "Every day. But Mama Aya used to say that the sight is both a gift and a burden. If you have it and hide it, you lose both. If you have it and share it, you multiply it." She looked at the white coat she was wearing, the credentials Kenneth had fought to get her, the position he'd created, the respect she'd earned not through degrees but through undeniable results. "I spent 12 years invisible," Grace continued. 12 years believing that my knowledge didn't matter because it didn't come with the right papers. But that night in the Harding Pavilion, I remembered something important. "What's that?" Kenneth asked. Grace smiled, watching little James grab a stethoscope and try to put it in his mouth. "That the most valuable technology in the world isn't in machines. It's in hands that know how to heal." in eyes that know how to see, in hearts that refuse to stay silent when silence means death. Catherine crossed the room and hugged Grace tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for saving me, for being brave enough to knock on that door." Grace hugged her back, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat of a woman who'd come back from the edge of death. "Thank you," she replied, "for giving me a chance, for trusting a janitor over 15 experts, for reminding me that I'm more than the job I was forced to take." Kenneth joined the embrace, the three of them standing together in the classroom that had become a revolution, a place where ancient wisdom and modern medicine were finally learning to speak the same language. Little James tugged at Grace's coat, demanding attention. Grace laughed and picked him up again, spinning him in a circle while he giggled with pure, uninhibited joy. "You," she told him, "are proof that the sight is real, that knowledge doesn't need credentials to be true, that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone thinks doesn't belong there." The baby grabbed her nose and laughed. And Grace, former janitor, former midwife, current chief of observational medicine and teacher of the site, laughed with him, because she'd finally come home. Not to the Caribbean, not to her village, not to the past she'd left behind, but to herself, to the healer she'd always been, even when the world couldn't see it. And that, Mama Aya would have said, was the greatest homecoming of all. If Grace's story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Drop a comment telling us about a time you trusted your instincts against all odds. And subscribe, because more incredible true stories are coming your way. See you in the next video.